Is that okay with the participants?
Yeah, so that's
Yes,
fine
yes.
with me. I just have a clarification.
Sure.
Like, if it exceeds 3 minutes from the side of the respondents, could the time taken be deducted from the total time of the second speaker?
I think this is something for the team to answer, but I think we are flexible on this. Let's just be a bit more. I think the idea is to get to the bottom of the issue.
To the meat of the matter rather
Yeah.
than.
So the time we are not with. We want to follow it because you guys have a final to probably go to. So you'll need enough rest. But let's start off. Okay. So I'll let the respondents start with the argument first, please.
Pleasant greetings of the day, honorable members of the tribunal. I am the co-counsel for the side respondents, and as directed by the members of the tribunal, I'm going to argue the third issue here. With due permission, I'll begin.
Sure.
Under this issue, the charterers have argued and that they have performed their part of the agreement about keeping my client informed of the claim. And we had brought a point here that my client has not been duly informed about the claim. Just for clarification, the claim being talked about herein is the underlying claim. That is the primary claim that the cargo interests had brought against the charterers, and for which they have filed an indemnity proceeding before the tribunal today. So before making substantive arguments, I'd like to draw the attention of the tribunal to some pertinent facts and dates. It would just give some background to my substantive submission. So my client had discharged the said containers from the vessel on 31st July 2018. On 8th August, after 8 days, the consignees found damage to the goods. And subsequently on the same day, a survey was conducted jointly by the consignees and the charterers. However, my client was not even invited to attend any such survey. Not only this, my client was not even issued a letter of protest at the time of discharge. So the goods were delivered, a survey was conducted, a claim was initiated, a claim was unilaterally settled by the charterers. However, in this whole process, my client was not even given a notice of the same. Now, coming to my submission, I argue that timely information of an underlying claim is as important for my client as it is for the charterer. Though the charterer is the contractual carrier, the principal carrier still remains my client. The ultimate burden of the underlying claim has to be borne by my owner. In the event that an underlying claim is made and the ship owners are not informed of the same in a timely manner, it results in great commercial implications, which the tribunal would also understand. For example, my client has till date, and I'm talking about 1.5 years since the underlying claim was first initiated. My client has till date not been able to assess the damage to the goods, and we haven't been given any opportunity to inspect the goods. Now, the only evidence that we are made to mandatorily rely on in this indemnity proceeding is a unilateral survey that is conducted by the charterers. Being the principal carrier, it is only my client, because it was my client and the master who had undertaken the journey. It is only my client who can provide evidences and information to the charterers to process, or for that matter, defend the underlying claim, because all the documents of the journey is with me. Now, without any admission to liability herein, for every claim that my client may have to bear, he is required to advise his P&I club, his insurers, who the tribunal would understand and note that they take an increasingly strict approach to prompt claims processing and reporting. Plus, they also want to conduct survey of the damaged cargo. So to protect myself from any further claim, I have to undertake all of these rights. For undertaking those rights, for exercising those rights, it is important that the charterers notify me of the claim. Now, where does the charter's obligation lie in terms of notifying my claim? Now, it is to avoid these wide-ranging commercial implications that clause 16H was included in the charter party. If the tribunal may look at clause 16H on page number 18 of the charter party, clause 16H says that if the tribunal is with me, I'm just reading out for the benefit of the tribunal, the charterer shall make no payment in excess of the amount as stated in box 32. Box 32 amount being US dollars 3,000, and the current claim is around $89,000. In settlement of a claim for which they intend to seek recovery from the owners without prior consultation with the owners. Now, I want to put forward before the tribunal that the word prior consultation is of the utmost importance here. In this regard, if I may just draw the tribunal's attention to a very authoritative source who defines that what is this prior consultation, And why? What is the commercial purpose of prior consultation here? If the tribunal may look at page 50 of the compendium.
Good.
Yes. So just a second. I'm referring to page 50 of the compendium, claims authority. And this is a commentary by John Richardson, who was a part of the the committee for formation of Boxstein Charter Party. He writes, he comments for 16H. I'm referring to the first paragraph. I'm reading for the benefit of the tribunal. In a liner servition, where a multiplicity of small claims can arise, the charterer need a degree of flexibility in handling claims arising from their customers. At the same time, the owners need to keep a close watch on such matters and ensure that they get the earliest advice of claims. The important here word is earliest advice of claims, so that they can advise their P&I clubs who take an increasingly strict approach to prompt claims reporting. Now, this is important. This subclause seeks to satisfy the requirements of both parties in this respect in a reasonable compromise. So the claim settlement is not a unilateral obligation of the charterer. It is a reasonable compromise. It has to be jointly undertaken by the owner and the charterer. I'm continuing from the last paragraph of the same 16H. I'm reading from line 3rd. It is difficult to imagine that any charterer would not do this, as they would almost certainly need to obtain any evidence. The owners may have to process or defend the claim. But if they do not consult, they cannot recover. Now, honorable members of the tribunal, the explanation to this is very clear, that the consultation under clause 16H needs to be a fair consultation process. It's not any mechanical act. It is not a mere formality. It has a wide ranging commercial implications in case this is rendered to be a mere mechanical act.
Counsel, may I just
Now,
interrupt and ask you a couple of questions on this? I understand. I think you've put the point across. Only a couple of questions I have on this. If you could answer, can you hear me at least?
Yes.
Okay. So the first question I have is, as I understand the submissions, the claimant's claim comes under clause 17, right?
Indeed.
I think this seems to be the admitted position that the claim is under clause 17 and not clause 16. But please correct me if I'm wrong. But assuming that is the case,
No, it's in there. Yes,
assuming
it's indeed
that,
under 17.
Yes. So then how is 16H applicable to 17?
Indeed. So for that matter, if the tribunal may look at 16A, 16A is very relevant in this regard. So under this charter party, what has happened is that the under this time charter party, and through section 13O, though the ship owners are the actual carriers in 13O. So though the ship owners in usual commercial practice are the actual carriers, but herein they have given the authority to the charters to be the contractual carriers. However, they have limited their obligations also. Now, both of the obligation is divided into charter party, but the contractual carrier, the authority to sign bill of lading and enter into further contract of carriage was given to the charterers. In this regard, in continuance, I am reading 13O with 16A. 16A says that except as elsewhere provided in this charter party and without prejudice to the charterer's right to initiate recovery against the owners under clause 17, the charterer shall be responsible for all claims in respect of any liability or expense whatsoever or howsoever arising in connection with the goods and containers carried pursuant to this charter party or their carriage. The important part is the line after this in the bracket. Even if such liability arises wholly or in part by reason of the act, neglect or default of the owners or of such servant, agent or subcontractor. So an authority has been granted by the owners to the charterer to settle the claim. But this has to be read with 16H, which says that such settlement should not take place without prior consultation with the owners. Because subsequently, because you see, honorable member, the charterer is only a middleman here. He's not going to bond any liability. He is going to pass on that liability under clause 17 to me. If there is a claim that is brought under Hague-Wisby rules in bill of lading, he will pass on that liability to me under clause 17 because 16A gives him that right. And therefore, 16H is inserted here, which says that you will not settle any claim without prior consultation with me. And within this prior consultation, it is my submission, it involves a timely notification. Now, timely notification is as soon as the charterer knows about this, you have to inform the owner also about it. So that both of them can exercise their rights in an efficient manner.
Yes, can I just interrupt you there? The way I read 16H is this, and assuming it applies to 17 like you submit, okay? And that is open to interpretation, but let's assume it does. It basically says that if the charterer wants to settle a claim below 3,000, he does not need to come to you and seek your confirmation, authorization. If it's above 3,000, right, he cannot therefore settle on your behalf. That would be the interpretation of 17A or 17B, and read with 16H. One interpretation. I'm not saying that's the interpretation. In these circumstances, how are you prejudiced? I understand you're giving prejudicial arguments, the evidence, etc. You weren't able to go and survey the thing. There was no LOP issued. How does this bar them? Because this question comes a question of, you are saying that their claim is completely precluded by the mere fact that they've given 16, not given you a notice within 16H. Where does the clause give such a right to you, to the respondents, to argue this?
Right.
And you made
Honorable
prejudicial
member
arguments so far. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, honorable members. So that's the reason why I highlighted the commercial purpose of this consultation process.
Okay.
So this could have gone without this clause also. 16A would have been sufficient for the charterers to unilaterally settle the claim. The purpose why 16H was added here is to avoid all of these prejudices that has happened to the ship owner in this. Now, also,
I think
uh,
there's only one thing, and I'm going to interrupt you because I think we spend more time. So your answer is 16H does not preclude a claimant from bringing a claim. However, the tribunal should imply this or interpret this because the commercial prejudice which has been caused by them not notifying you. Is that correct? Am I summarizing this correctly?
Yeah, indeed, honorable arbitrator, that is correct. But only one point is that there is no need of implication here.
Okay.
There is no implication here. It is very express that without
Sure.
prior consultation, and it's not prior consultation also, it's a fair consultation process, which includes telling the owner as soon as you get to know about it. And in absence of this, it has prejudiced my claim. You see, there's a $90,000, and my client has not even seen if there is any damage to goods or not. What we are relying upon is a unilateral survey. That
Are you disputing the survey report? And which means the consequence. Just think about before you answer this question, because the consequences of that is going to be that once you dispute this survey report, you cannot rely upon this survey report, or rather any aspect of the survey report to your advantage. It can't be that you dispute the survey report on one hand as calling it unilateral, and on the other hand then proceed to say, oh, but you look at the survey report for other arguments in my favor. That can't happen. So think through and tell us whether you are going to dispute the veracity of the survey report and not going to rely upon the survey report.
Indeed. So, honorable member, I am not disputing the survey report. What I am saying is that a timely notice of the claim would have also given me an opportunity to conduct my own survey, so that I could have brought in an adversarial evidence in that regard.
Then hold on there. Then the question asked by my co-arbitrator becomes very relevant. Then how are you prejudiced? On one hand, you say that you are not disputing or impeaching the veracity of the survey report, which means that you are proceeding on a demurrer, or you're proceeding on the basis that the survey report or the findings of the survey report are correct. Then it makes no difference to you whether the survey, whether you did or did not get an opportunity to conduct your own survey. Because if you are saying that the survey report correctly, or you're not impeaching the survey report at all, then it makes no difference whether you have got an opportunity or you didn't get that opportunity to conduct your own survey. And if there is a PNI, of course, I'll come to that aspect later on the PNI aspect.
All right. Honorable arbitrator, there is a due procedure. I am saying that in that due procedure, the first step was breached. I was not given an opportunity. But now that I have to mandatorily argue on merits in this tribunal, before this tribunal today, I have no option but to rely on this survey report. That is my only submission in this regard. But that does not change the fact that I was not given an opportunity to conduct the survey.
Noted. I think we can switch. Proceed. I don't know how this can. You want to address your second point now first, or you want me?
Just one last question. Are you reading that without prior consultation, or are you reading the words? Do you mean that the words prior consultations, within itself, or would subsume within itself a necessity to by the charterer to convince you on the claim?
No. Honorable member, I'm not saying that there needs to be an agreement. I also don't want to prejudice the right of the charterer to settle the claim against his under his contract. But what I'm saying is that this prior consultation only had to take place at a relevant time. Now, this prior consultation would have been relevant when the claim was still at its formative stage, when you were not going to settle it. Now that you have decided to settle the claim, giving me 15 days and saying that your agreement does not matter to me, I'm anyways going to settle the claim, has caused serious prejudice. And that's my only submission in this regard. I'm not saying that you have to take my consent or we had to have a meeting of minds, but just the only part is that it had to be at a relevant stage, and that relevant stage has passed, and therefore this claim should be absolutely barred at this point of time.
All right, brilliant. Okay, we'll stop you there. If you could just switch the timing and let the claimant then respond specifically to this argument on 16H, please.
Yes, am I audible, members of the tribunal?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
You are.
Just wait
Yes, you
for
are,
the
counsel.
tribunal. Members of the tribunal, I would rebut the points by the respondent in 3 limbs. First, very briefly, I will touch upon how my client fulfilled his obligation of informing the respondents within the time period specified by the charter party. Second, I would address why the respondent did not have a right to be called to the survey report. And third, I would deal with clause 16H. Coming to time period, members of the tribunal, if you would turn your attention to clause 17D on page number 19 of the fact sheet. Clause 17D clearly says that as long as the claim is notified within 24 months of the delivery of the goods, the claim is valid. That is the only time limit envisioned by clause 17D. Hence, the respondent's submission that my client did not inform him on time does not stand, as my client was well within his rights under the charter party to do so in January. Secondly, the respondent claimed that they had a right to be invited to the survey report. First of all, the charter party imposes no obligation, and the respondent has not mentioned any such obligation to the charter party, that my client was supposed to actually invite the respondents. Further, the respondents have claimed that they could benefit from being invited to the survey. It is submitted that marine surveyors themselves are bound by a certain code of ethics, and they are sworn by impartiality. It is not possible, and this is all laid out in the International Code of Marine Surveyors, International Institution of Marine Surveyors, and it is not possible for my client to have lost rights by the survey being conducted by my client. Further, the matter
But the
itself,
presence, counsel, the presence would have ensured at least to the satisfaction of the owners that the survey is in fact being carried in accordance with the guidelines laid down by the international surveys that you are in fact relying upon. How do they today know that whether those surveys were conducted in accordance with the guidelines that you mentioned, if they were not present?
the surveyors themselves have an ethical duty.
What they are in
Mr.
breach?
Arbitrator,
My question proceeds on
Yes,
the
Mr.
basis: what
Arbitrator.
if they are in breach? How would the owners, in that sense, how would the owners know this, and how would the owners protest against that?
Mr. Arbitrators, it is submitted the interests of my client and the owners in this case were actually aligned, and my clients would represent the interest of the owners as well, because the underlying claim is paid first by out of the pocket of my clients, and it is in their interest to ensure that this claim is legitimate. My client has no incentive whatsoever to fabricate a false claim, because the recovery claim is upon the decision of this tribunal. The primary claim is being paid from my client.
Point
Hence,
taken.
since the interests are aligned, my client could not have acted in bad faith. Finally, I would like to address the respondent's claim that 16H required prior consultation. We must look at the language of 16H, and it is seen that the intention of the parties to actually give the owner an opinion was only when the owner's opinion would have actually made a difference. Members of the tribunal, my client was bound under clause 5 of the terms of carriage on page 64 to actually make the payment. This contract was between my client and the merchant. The owner was not a party to this contract. No matter what, even if my client had asked for the owner's opinion, sought his consultation, no matter what the owner says or does, there would be no impact on the fact that my client would still be legally obligated under the terms of carriage to settle the underlying claim.
No, I don't think that is the argument. Sorry, just to interrupt you there. I don't think the respondents are saying that you don't have an obligation under the bill of lading. The respondent's point is very simple. The purpose of 16H is to avoid prejudice, which eventually comes to them because you're passing the claim up the line. And if you understand up the line, you're going back to the owners. And they are saying that the purpose of 16H was brought in to address this prejudice which may be caused to them. So they're not challenging your right to sue, which you can sue them. They are saying that the indemnity claim becomes questionable in itself by the fact that you did not give them a notice under 16H or prior consultation. He's not saying he needs your agreement. He can disagree, you can settle, and you can still come to them. But you did not even do that in the first place. That is his case.
On 16th of January, on the mail dated 9th and 10th, my client clearly gave information to the respondents regarding the claim. The owners would not have lost any rights, will not lose any rights, even if my client had consulted them, because my client would have anyway had to make the payment. It wouldn't have made any commercial difference, even if my client had consulted the owner beforehand. That is the primary submission of the council.
So I'll come to your email now, and that's my last question on this, unless the other tribunal members have something. I look at your email of 16 January, right? Please, can you look at that? I don't have the page numbers with me, but it's marked without prejudice. Do you feel there's an impact with this? Is the tribunal obliged to look at a document which is marked without prejudice? Because just to give you the understanding, I don't know if for the benefit, if I can just explain, what we are contemplating is if this is without prejudice, and therefore it may not be considered as evidence which can be admissible for the purposes of the arbitration. So maybe you can elaborate on why you think this document still should be a part of the record.
Mr. Arbitrator, it is clear that information about our intention to make the payment was supplied to the respondent before we actually made the payment. Hence, through the mail dated 16 January.
Yes.
Hence, this clearly acts as the evidence that we have supplied information before making the payment.
One second. You haven't understood the question that my co-arbitrator asked you. The question is simple: whether a document which is marked as without prejudice can be said to be admissible before a tribunal. That's the sum and substance of the question.
The council is not aware, Mr. Members.
No worries. Okay, we can plead ignorance and then proceed with that. No problem at all.
That would conclude the submissions of the council.
Certainly. Okay. So then I think now that you have concluded on this issue, preliminary issue, we can now proceed to the claimant's case on why they are entitled to an indemnity under the charter party.
The council one from the claimants may start if the members of the tribunal are ready.
Yes, we are.
Okay, I'll wait for the timer. One.
If the speaker could just inform me of the time that she will take.
It was 22 minutes. Good afternoon, respected members of the tribunal. This is Council 1 representing claimants, Timeous Cargo Lines in the dispute between Atlantis Empire and Timeous Cargo Lines. The Council 1 will be dealing with the mainly issue 1, that is, the ship owners failed in their part of the agreement with respect to monitoring and taking care of the container and the cargo. And my co-counsel has already dealt with one issue and will be dealing with another issue in his submission. With Respect to jurisdiction, the Council submits that the present tribunal constituted according to the procedure laid down in clause 20 of the Charter Party does have jurisdiction to hear the present dispute as it is a negotiated Charter Parties. The parties willingly agreed to refer to arbitration tribunal when said dispute arises. Further, my opposition counsel have in their written submission not made any reservation regarding the jurisdiction of the present tribunal. They have conceded that the present tribunal does have jurisdiction according to page number 1, which is written on the fact sheet, and according to clause 20. Therefore, if the members of the tribunal they agree, the council would directly proceed to the merits of the issue.
Please proceed. There is no issue framed pertaining to jurisdiction. You proceed.
All right, Mr. Members of the tribunal, the council emphasized that the issue dealt with by her today would be that the respondents breached their duty to monitor and take care of the reefers and the cargo. To do that, the council would take the members through all the relevant clauses and simultaneously through the facts which are given in the fact sheet and will establish how the ship owners failed their duty. If the members of the tribunal may please refer to clause 17A2 of the Charter Party on page number 18. 17A2. According to the responsibility and the liability of the owners, it is stated that the owners shall properly and carefully carry, keep, and care for the goods and the containers on the boat. Now, the emphasis needs to be put on the point that the word properly and carefully have been used, because the word properly adds value to the word carefully, not just of mere duty to care, but a responsibility which is in the light of the knowledge of all the facts regarding the cargo. The cargo in the present case is temperature sensitive, which was required to be kept at 13.6 degrees Celsius throughout the Charter Party, as it has been clearly laid. However, the ship owners again and again failed in their duty to monitor this temperature and ensure that the temperature was addressed in a timely manner. The council would establish the breach of the ship owner's duty through two sublims. Sublim 1, that the ship owners failed to monitor and address the temperature increase in a timely manner. Sublim 2, that there was no continuous power supply, which was the duty of the ship owners. Coming to the sublim 1, that the ship owners did not monitor and address the temperature increase in a timely manner. I would request the members of the tribunal to please pay their attention to clause 11D of the Charter Party on page number 16. If the members are with me, or I will read it for the members of the tribunal.
No, we're with you, don't worry.
Clause 11D says that it's the owners who have to ensure that the refrigeration facilities described in part 3 are maintained in good working order throughout the currency of this Charter Party. Now, members of arbitrator, the basic and the fundamental presumption behind good refrigeration facilities is that it continues to maintain the required temperature, which was 13.6 degrees Celsius. Further, if clause 11D, the members may also refer to 70P of the Charter Party on page 19 on the left hand side. It says that the owners shall monitor. Members of arbitrators take note that not just record, they have to monitor the performance minimum once daily of all such refrigerated containers or units. Therefore, it is clearly the duty of the ship owners that they have to maintain, they have to monitor the condition of the containers and how the refrigeration facilities are going on. Now, the council will establish the facts how the ship owners failed in this duty. If the members may please refer to page number 107. Page number 107 will take you to the temperature logs. Members of the tribunal on page number 107. If they may notice the date of 10 July, the temperature starts fluctuating. The temperature starts continuously fluctuating on 11 July at 2 a.m. that is in the night 2 a.m. 11 July. The temperature keeps on increasing for the period of more than 64 hours till the temperature reaches the point of 21.5 degrees Celsius. That is substantially more than the required temperature of 13.6 degrees Celsius, which was required to be maintained. The council summits had the ship owners been continuously monitoring the increase in the temperature, which they were required to do, they would have noticed the increase in temperature on the morning of 11 July or on the morning of 12 July. However, according to the Malrief reports, it was only on 13 July that the required action and notice of the same was taken.
Council, whose reefer container was this?
Containers belong to the charterers, Mr. Arbitrator.
So therefore, these are reefer containers, the containers who in which there is, provision for maintaining temperature. Am I right?
Yes, Mr. Arbitrator.
So therefore, is it not open to argue that the fault lied in the containers, because of which the temperature could not be maintained as required? Temperature of 13.6 could not be maintained as mandated and as reflected in the bill of lading?
Okay, Mr. Arbitrator, the council would answer this question. And the council would first emphasize that in the survey reports, it's nowhere mentioned directly that it is the fault of the containers which led to the temperature increase. Further,
what logs are you referring to? These are which logs?
Mr. Arbitrator, if you would refer to page number 75 for once. Page number 75 talks about the survey report in respect of the container. And it talks that the condition of the container was sound. It's mentioned on the above on page number 75. Further, it's only mentioned, or it's nowhere mentioned directly that it was the malfunction in the container itself. But let's say there was malfunction in the container which led to temperature fluctuation, because there can be instances. This is the reason why clause 17A2 was incorporated in the charter party. Clause 17A2 states that whenever the container and the cargo are on the board, it is the ship owner's duty to maintain and take care of them. Further, clause 17B states that the temperature fluctuations which finally happen have to be monitored regularly. The basic intention behind incorporating 17B was to ensure that whenever there is temperature fluctuation happening.
Just pause here for a minute. Your contention is accepted. Please tell us, where do we find in 17B or anywhere in the charter party that the temperature has to be monitored continuously? I can see the clause 7, at least clause 17B say that it has to be monitored minimum once. The obligation is to at least monitor once in the day.
Yes,
where do we get this, that there has to be a continuous monitoring on the part of the ship?
No, Mr. Arbitrator. The council will establish that they even if they had to monitor minimum once daily, they failed. As the council already pointed out, that the temperature starts rising on 11 July, 2 a.m. continuously. It's a steep rise. It continues to rise till 13 July or in the evening. Now, if they are monitoring once daily, that is 11 July morning, 12 July morning, 13 July morning, they would have come to know of the temperature fluctuation. It's not that it was dead, even within morning rounds or 24 hours. Similarly, to back this argument, the council would draw the tribunal's attention to one more important fact. If the members may please refer to page number 111 on the temperature logs. Page number.
Yeah.
Page number 111 talks about the 27 July logs. Now the temperature again starts rising on 8 a.m. and it continues to rise till 29 July. Therefore, again, there is a gap of 46 hours. And it's not about, it clearly establishes that the monitoring was not even done once daily. Because had the such responsibility been fulfilled, they would have taken care of the same. Because as the opposition council themselves said, they are the primary carriers in this case, and therefore the purpose of the whole voyage is to transport the cargo safely. And therefore the intention of the parties should be whenever there's temperature fluctuation, and it's your duty that you have to monitor once daily and not just record, you take the timely action. Further, the council would now move to the sublim 2, that is, the ship owners fail to ensure continuous power supply. If the members of the tribunal may again refer to clause 17b of the charter party on page number 19 on the left hand side. The clause clearly says that for the provision of electrical power, it is the owners who shall be responsible. Further, it has been observed in the case, it's a similar case where the grapes were transported from point A to point B, but there were power offs in between. And what the judges observed in this particular case was, I'll read it out for the members. The refrigerated cargo must be kept off power for the least possible time. Otherwise, owners can be held liable for damage to temperature-sensitive cargoes. It should be noticed that the maximum permissible time for the period off should be 1 hour in the case where there is cold treatment provided to the cargo or there is controlled atmosphere. However, the maximum period allowed for the power off for the chilled cargo or the containerized cargo should be 3 hours. Members of the tribunal, you would like to notice that the power was not supplied to the container, not just for 1 hour or 3 hours, which can be usually allowed for technical or the operational glitches, but the power went off for a continuous period of 20 hours, not just on one occasion, but on several occasions. For example, if the members of the tribunal may refer to page number 121 of the fact
Yes, the
sheet.
logs.
Yes. The logs clearly points out that it's on the evening of 4th July that the power goes off. On the 5th July evening, the power is actually returned. Therefore, the power was not there for 20 hours, which can have an adverse effect on the temperature-sensitive cargoes, which need a required 13.6 degree of Celsius temperature to ensure that there is no ripening or no such instance in the case.
Council, may I draw your attention to clause 5, subclause 9 at line 85 at page 14.
Yes, yes, Mr. Arbitrator, I'm there.
The plugging and unplugging of the reefer container was the charterer's responsibility, because the actions of the crew for plugging and unplugging of the reefer container would be treated as, for that purposes, the crew would be treated as a charter servant. If that is the case, would the responsibility not be on you for there being no continuous power supply to the reefer container?
Mr. Arbitrator, as far as the understanding of council is concerned, plugging and unplugging of the reefer container usually happens when the loading is completed, like when the voyage starts and when the voyage ends. Further, in the Mallory's reports, it is pointed that this power fluctuation happened due to the tripping of the container. Now, due to the tripping. Now, if the tripping has happened, the continuous power supply still has to be given by the ship owners, because it is their duty to ensure that temperature sensitive cargoes are kept in the required temperature which is needed. Therefore, they clearly failed to ensure continuous power supply. Further, Mr. Arbitrator, if the members would refer to page number 118 and 119, they would realize that it's not just one day when the power went off. It's like when the power goes off actually. It's on the 13th July as well, which happens. It's on 29 July. It's on 31 July. There have been various instances when this happens. Mr. Arbitrator, the council feels that there is a need to highlight a very important case here, which may help the tribunal decide the negligence on the part of the ship owners. The case in which the meat was transported from point A to point B, I can name the case Foreman and Elams versus Federal Navigation Company. The judges observed that the excessive and the irregular temperature would indicate prima facie negligence or default in the care of the cargo on the ship, because in any refrigerated cargo, the primary duty in making sure that the refrigerated cargo is preserved is only to is only through two things. That is, the proper temperature is maintained and monitored, and second, there is proper management of refrigeration machinery. In this case, there was irregular and excessive temperature fluctuations. They were not taken and monitored once daily as laid down in the charter party, and because of that, the cargo got spoiled.
So, sorry, Counsel, just to interrupt you. So you're saying if the cargo was monitored on a regular basis, this damage would not have occurred? Is that, I just want an answer, yes and no, if it's possible.
If the yes, Mr. Arbitrator, had there been timely information regarding the increase in temperature, and had it been accordingly dealt, then there would have been no damage.
Certainly. So that follows up with the question, by not following the requirement of maintaining the monitoring the cargo on a day-to-day basis or monitoring the temperature, would you say this is like a failure in the management of the vessel?
It's in the failure in the management of the vessel, not necessarily, Mr. Arbitrator. What we need to look at is when we are carrying refrigerated cargoes, we need to draw the distinction between management of the vessel and taking care of the cargo.
Okay.
Taking care of the cargo is when the whole purpose of the voyage was to take care of the cargo. It has to be differentiated from the management of the vessel. Management of the vessel would involve rectifying something which happens in the vessel itself, and this duty has been clearly differentiated.
Point taken.
Now, if the member,
sorry, just one follow-up
Yes,
question
Mr.
from this. If you look at the survey report indicates that there were pre-shipment issues with your cargo. How do you address this? Because your entire thrust of the, from what I understood, the thrust of your argument is that since there is no proper management, there is no proper monitoring of the cargo. Therefore, it is for that reason that the consignment of your bananas has in fact been affected or have got spoiled. But the survey report speaks otherwise. Your own survey report, on the basis of which you rely upon, indicates that there were pre-shipment issues. Pictures which are available indicate that the condition of the bananas even prior to the shipment were in fact were not up to the mark. You can see that
Yes.
at page 89, and then thereafter from there onwards, 89, 90, 91 of
yes,
your
Mr. Arbitrator, the council should answer that question with two limbs. First, so in the survey report also it's not mentioned that the pre-shipment issues were exacerbated to that extent as they were in the end of the voyage. Further, it does not mention that all the cartons in the container had the pre-shipment issue. Despite that fact, 30% of the containers, due to the temperature fluctuations, suffered pre-shipment issues, and the condition of the bananas, even if they had minimal pre-shipment issues, got exacerbated a lot due to the temperature fluctuation. The second limp which the council was referring to, the council would now prove that the ship provided, the vessel provided in the first place was unseaworthy. And whenever there is unseaworthiness of the vessel itself, even according to the Hague rules, the defense of inherent vice cannot be taken. If the members of the tribunal may agree, the council would now go on to establish how the vessel was unseaworthy. And it is the similar obligation which is laid down in 17A1 of the Charter Party.
So just, sorry, Counsel, just to hold on, just 1 second. I think my co-arbitrator had a question in this regard, or maybe not, but you say that the Hague-Visby rules are applicable, right?
Hague rules.
Hague rules are applicable. Can you please identify on what basis do you say that?
Mr. Arbitrator, clause 5 of the terms of the carriage, read along with clause 14. I'll guide the direct, if I can give in, yeah. Clause 14B1. Clause 14B1 of the Charter Party, I'll read it out for the arbitrator, say.
That's fine. I know what 14B1 says. Can you just read 14B?
The charter's warrant that the bill of lading issued in respect of the carriage of goods and container shall contain the following clauses.
Yeah,
Yes.
So it says that
the-
the bill of lading should include it.
Yes.
It doesn't say the charter party is governed by the Hague rules.
Yes, and it says that so it says that the charters have to ensure it is included. Therefore, the ship owners want that the ship owners clearly want the charters to warrant that the bill of lading it is included. Now, in the bill of lading, it is clearly included in clause 5.
Yes, I don't think, Council, I'm sorry to interrupt you again. The question is not whether the bill of lading incorporates the Hague rules, right? That's not the dispute. The question now is you are bringing your case saying that the owners have breached their obligation of the Hague rules. Is that correct? Is my
No,
understanding correct?
no, Mr. Arbitrator. The council would take the attention of Mr. Arbitrator to clause 17A1.
So, okay. So then I don't
So
think we
the
don't need to get into the discussion of the Hague rules.
yes,
That's probably the answer.
the liability is same under both Hague rules as well as 17A1. It is the exact clause. So under that, the defense, if the unseaworthiness ship has been provided from the ship owner's end, the defense of inherent vice cannot be taken. Now the council will establish, and if the council can get an extension of 1 minute to
Sure.
establish the point,
Yes. Please.
the Mr. Arbitrator, the seaworthiness means that the ship must be fit to carry the intended voyage. And further, in the cases like Maori King, it has been held that sometimes when when the purpose of the ship is to that seaworthiness also extends to ensuring that the refrigeration machinery is also working in a proper condition. Further, the seaworthiness also extends to cargo worthiness, that the cargo has to be carried in a proper manner, considering the nature of the cargo. However, there were multiple temperature fluctuations which happened. The refrigeration machinery could not keep the required temperature of 13.6 degree. Further, it took even if there were temperature fluctuation, it took the vessel a lot time to pull down the temperature of the air. The council already established that it took almost 60 hours. Therefore, the vessel was not even in seaworthy condition to carry the specific cargo, that is the temperature sensitive bananas, because no prudent owner would allow the shipping of temperature sensitive cargoes like bananas on board where the refrigeration machinery cannot be controlled. Therefore, as the
Council,
council,
but you just said that the refrigeration, I mean the reefer container belongs to you. So how do you blame the vessel for
Um,
for not being cargo worthy?
Mr. Arbitrator, if the council would mention a case fact, in the case of Heinz Horns, it was observed that it is the ship's function basically to pull down like the storage area where the containers are kept, to pull down the temperature of the air. Here, if the temperature of the air was not pulled down properly by the vessel itself, and the refrigeration facilities, according to clause 11D, are the liability on the ship owners. Therefore, the whole purpose of cooling down the air, and that is important for ensuring seaworthiness in the present case, lies on the ship owners.
Sorry, I'll just follow up on a question on this, right? Like I agree with you on the definition of seaworthiness. I agree with you on the definition of cargo worthiness, and that's fine. Are you saying that there were 17 other containers on the ship?
Yes, Mr.
And of course, that's what we know. There would be far many more containers, but let's assume there are 17 reefer containers. 16 of them are fine. It's an admitted case. So why do you say the vessel is not cargo worthy? Because there's only one container which is not in a condition suitable. Please, can you just address that? And I know time is up. So this is just the final question we have.
It is the one container indeed which suffered issue. Now, if there is no power supply, there is temperature fluctuation happening in one container, the vessel storage system and all the refrigeration facilities have to ensure that the temperature of the air is brought down, that the proper pull is maintained. However, it was not done. And the liability there is on the ship owners and the vessel to do so. So because the temperature fluctuations, the supply of power problems happened when the one container. Therefore, it came into the notice that the vessel was not in a proper condition to regulate those things with respect to that one container also.
Okay. So again, sorry, when did the voyage start? Let's just put this as a question answer. When did the voyage commence?
3rd July.
Were there problems on 3rd July?
There were no problems as such which were apparent.
When did the problem start?
The problem starts during the voyage on the 4th, 5th July, 13th July, 31st, 29th
Fair
July.
enough.
On all
At the
these
commencement of the voyage, was there an issue?
not very specifically, but
Not understood.
the respondent, but the speaker has clearly established that it's not necessary that it should be there at because the whole purpose has to be ensured that the cargo is carried properly. Now, if you,
Understood.
yes,
I think your case is better under 17A2 than 17A1. That's just my
yes,
preliminary
indeed,
thoughts.
that
So I
is
get that. I
that
get
is.
what your argument is.
Thank you, members of the tribunal. Now, my co-counsel will be dealing with the rest of the issues.
Thank you.
Members of the tribunal, since I've already dealt with issue number 3, I will be moving with my submissions in issue number 2. That is, it should not, that the owner was responsible to advise the charterer on reefer malfunction. Members of the tribunal, to understand the owner's obligations and responsibilities, we must look at clause 17B of the charter party. On page number 19, clause 17B specifically talks about refrigerated goods. Members of the tribunal, the words I want to emphasize from clause 17B are that the owners shall endeavor to repair and rectify any breakdown, fault, or deficiency in the refrigerated machinery. Members of the tribunal, the Black's Law Dictionary, an authority on interpreting contractual meanings, defines the word endeavor as a systematic or continuous effort. It is clear 17B imposes a direct obligation on the owners to make a systematic and continuous effort to ensure the refrigerated machinery is maintained throughout the currency of the charter party. Members of the tribunal, there are 2 further clauses in the standard form of contract which have been struck down during the negotiations of the by framing this current charter party. I would direct the members to these clauses and to understand the intention behind striking them down. It is the first clause which limits the liability of the owner to ensure supply of air at the required temperature only. And the word only, when the clause says the owners should ensure power supply only, have been consciously struck down. This clearly means that at the time of entering into a contract, both the parties, my client and the respondents, agreed that the owner's responsibility should not be limited to supplying electrical power, but has to extend to endeavoring to repairing and rectify the breakdown of refrigerated machinery. My co-counsel has already established how the respondents did not fulfill these obligations. It is my submission that my opposing counsel, in their submissions to this tribunal, have selectively read clause 17B. They have emphasized how 17B only imposes a duty of monitoring logs. However, they have failed to mention that this is simultaneous with the responsibility to endeavor to repair and rectify. Members of the tribunal, my opposing counsel has argued that all acts done in respect of repairing and of reefers are done as my client servants. However, it is submitted, and as was seen in the case of Mercy Docks versus Harbour Board, that whenever there are 2 masters of the crew, the primary master, the one who appointed and employs him, which in this case is the owner, shall be the one held responsible for acts of negligence.
Counsel, I just want you to address the Malreef reports on this and explain to me exactly why you say that the endeavor on the crew's part to fix these malfunctionings weren't sufficient. Because as I understand it, that is what your case is. That whatever they did wasn't enough.
Madam Arbitrator, on page 111 of the fact sheet, the temperature logs are clearly given. And here it is clearly seen that on the 11th of July, the temperature started rising. However, the second Malreef report was sent only on the 13th of July. It is clear that there was a 48-hour gap between the temperature actually started to rise and the Malreef report being sent. When it comes to temperature sensitive cargo like bananas, such a huge gap fails the very purpose of the voyage, because the bananas cannot be taken from one port to another if for such long periods of time the temperature is not maintained. Madam Arbitrator, members of the tribunal, further, if you refer to clause 15F of the Charter Party on page 18, clause 15F clearly says that nothing contained in the Charter Party shall be construed as the demise of the vessel to the charterer, and the crew owners and the owners remain responsible for acts of the crew. Members of the tribunal, it is clear.
I don't think that clause applies to you presently, but continue.
Members of the tribunal, it is very clear that the owners cannot claim that the vessel itself is demised to us. They will be responsible to ensure the crew acts in a competent manner and ensure.
Please see 17B. Please see clause 17B. It says that for the purposes of, for all these purposes, including for refrigeration, etc., the crew is treated to be the charterer's servants.
Mr. Arbitrator, as already submitted, that when due to the fact that the master is the one who appoints the crew, master is the one who pays the crew and employs the crew, any act of negligence on his part is a violation. The charterer's instructions were very clear. The purpose of the voyage.
Is your claim in the nature of tort, or is it a contractual? Are you claiming damages for breach of contract?
It's a contractual claim.
So then where's the question of master appointing this under your clause? If under your contract, once you agree that for the purposes of refrigeration, whatever crew that the master has employed, all responsibilities of that are on your head. Where is the question of then turning around and saying that I'm sorry, you now for the damages that I have suffered, please look up to the master?
Mr. Arbitrator, our instructions to the crew were clear. The crew was instructed by the charterers to ensure that the refrigerated cargo is maintained at 13.6 degrees throughout the duration of the voyage, and to maintain the logs minimum once daily, and if there's any deficiency, to repair and rectify. They have not, as already been established, they have not done this. This negligence is a responsibility of the primary master of the crew, who is the owner in this case. Our instructions were to be followed. That is why that is what 17B implies, that they should be done as per the instructions of my client. However, the fact that there was negligence is a responsibility of the master.
All right, proceed.
Further, there is a implied duty to cooperate within the terms of the Charter Party in any contractual matter. And this says that this was held in the case of Mackay vs. Dick. And it says that in any contract, both the parties must do everything possible to ensure the purpose of the contract is upheld. The owners cannot claim that all the acts of the crew were to be done as per the charterer servants, because they had a basic duty to cooperate and ensure that the refrigerated container was maintained at the set temperature, because only then can the purpose of the voyage be fulfilled.
Counsel, sorry, just on this question, and like you pointed out, this is an indemnity claim, and the team has basically pointed this out. It's an indemnity claim, right? So you need to satisfy, I mean, as one of the points is whether you reasonably settle the claim with the consignee as charterers. And the question is open to both you and your colleague on the dais. Can you just look at clause 12, please, of the bill of lading, not the Charter Party, the bill of lading? Are you with me on that?
Yes.
Can you look at 12.4?
Yes.
Can you all address that bit point? I mean, you can of course read the entire clause, not for us, for yourself, but
yeah, latent effect.
12.4, and I'm not on the latent. I mean, I'm just generally looking at the clause and saying whether it's applicable at all.
Mr. Arbitrator has submitted that it is nowhere mentioned that the latent defects directly led to the damage of goods. Even if the bananas had certain issues, if there were no temperature fluctuations, if the owners had actually maintained the 13.6 degrees temperature throughout the voyage, then the bananas would not have been overripened. Hence,
But was there a stoppage in the cooling of the bananas? That's what your case is?
Mr. Arbitrator, at the beginning of the voyage itself, there was no inherent defect in the goods because
My question is not that. My question is, was there a stoppage in the cooling of the containers in the refrigerator system?
No, Mr. Arbitrator.
No, not. Are you aware of it or you're not sure of it? Let me ask you that question as well.
Stoppage in the cooling? No.
Yeah. So
no, I don't
why?
think,
No, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So there was no breakdown as well in the container issue. I mean, I'm trying to figure out whether latent defect pertains to the containers here. Then there is discussion of breakdown, defrosting, stoppage of the refrigerating, ventilating, or any other specialized machinery, right? And in these circumstances, the carrier shall not be liable. I mean, I can read the entire clause, but it's right there. So do you think you could have had taken that defense with the receivers?
No, Mr. Arbitrator, this is because there was a problem on the end supply of the vessel. The vessel itself, as has been established by my co-counsel, was defective. And this led to the damage. Hence, it's clear that the terms of carriage bound my client to make the payment. However, the charter party has bound the owners because they have failed to ensure proper supply of air temperature to indemnify my client of the same. However, since there were clear issues with the supply of air temperature to the containers, this exception could not be taken.
Does clause 12.4 of the bill of lading apply to you? A yes or a no?
It applies to the underlying claim, not to the recovery claim being discussed right now. It applies to the underlying claim between my client and the merchants.
Proceed.
If the tribunal has no further questions, the counsel has already used up his time to submit issue 3 previously, so he would like to conclude his submissions.
Yeah, sure. You can just conclude the submissions. Thank you. Unless I think the tribunal other members have a question.
No, nothing.
Okay, thank you.
Greetings, members of the tribunal. I appear for the respondent in the present case along with my co-counsel. We will be making submissions in response to the claimant's submissions. I will be responding to the first issue as per the case study and will take 20 minutes of the tribunal's time. And my co-counsel has already responded to the third issue and will be responding to the second issue after me. We seek to reserve 3 minutes for such rebuttals. Before addressing the first submission, it is our responsibility to put forth certain points before this tribunal with more clarity. The parties had entered into a box time charter party for the carriage of refrigerated bananas. The charter party specifies the responsibility of my client to monitor and record the performance of the reefer container. However, the charter party also limits this responsibility to certain clauses, which I will be explaining further in my submissions. Now, what has happened in this case is that the integral refrigerated container provided by the charterer in which the cargo was stored malfunctioned several times during the voyage as a result of problems with its condenser fan motor and the temperature sensor. As a result of this, their cargo was damaged. The claimant is now trying to shift this obligation and liability of these problems with its reefer container on my client by terming it as a breach of monitoring and recording. Thus, in my submissions, I will be refuting the facts and contentions stated by the claimant by guiding the tribunal firstly through the contractual obligations of my client, and secondly, I will demonstrate in how in none of these malfunctions there is any breach of the said obligations of my client. Coming to the first limb of my argument, at the outset, I would like to emphasize that both the parties are commercially strong. Both were at an equal footing while negotiating and executing the contract. The parties have expressly divided the obligations and liabilities in the contract. There are some obligations on account of the charterer, and there are some obligations on account of my client. There are two clauses in the charter party with respect to obligation of monitoring and recording, which have to be read together, which are clause 5 and clause 17. Now let us look at these obligations from the charter party. I request the tribunal to refer to page 14 of the case study to clause 5. If the tribunal is with me.
Sure, let's proceed, yes.
So the owner shall provide crew assistant with respect to the following. I'm reading from line 83, clause 5B8. It says monitoring and recording performances once daily, and when available, supplying labor and standard tools for the repairing of the charterer's refrigeration machinery. Further, looking at the next clause to this is very important, which is clause 5B9, because I am reading the clause, plugging and unplugging of the reefer containers as charterer servants. So if there is any negligence by the vessel's crew in respect of plugging and unplugging of the reefer containers, that goes on account of the charterer and not my client.
Counsel, it uses the word if required. Was there a requirement in this case on behalf of the charterers?
Mr. Arbitrator, I was just introducing these obligations first, and then I will move to the more substantive submissions in the
Fair
case.
enough. Note this question and answer at the later point of time.
Sure.
When you...
Honorable member of the tribunal. So the principal issue, or if I may say the underlying problem in all this, underlying reason for all of this arbitration is the failure of the charterer in understanding of a reefer monitoring system. Though they have expressly agreed to adopt this system, yet they fail to understand its modalities. For the convenience of the tribunal and the charterers, I shall now be briefly explaining the working of a reefer and a reefer monitoring system. The reefer container contains a return air temperature sensor and a supply air temperature sensor. These sensors are nothing but data loggers which send the temperature list from the container to the master computer of the vessel for monitoring. As evidenced by page 51 of the case study, there was a De Jong reefer monitoring system in place during the currency of this charter party. A De Jong reefer monitoring system is a software that is installed on the master computer of the vessel. It is a software designed to automatically examine the voluminous documents, the voluminous temperature logs, which are sent to it by the charterer's containers. After examining these logs, the software, which is the monitoring system, prepares an event log, which in our case starts from page 114 of the case study. In case there is a significant temperature variation, it shows an alarm, it indicates an alarm. I also want to clarify here that there is no ringing of alarms as such. However, in the event log, it just displays the alarm activity textually, like just as extended container alarm activity, which we have seen in the event log as pointed out by the claimants. I just want to clarify here that the obligation was to monitor once daily. Thus, the member of the vessel's crew checks the master computer if there is any alarm activity once daily. In our case, this one round was done every morning, as can be evidenced by the Molreef report starting from page 126. Further, just to clarify a preliminary point, on page 5, there is an email by the charterer which says, as per contract, we shall rely on temperature data only and not on reefer monitoring logs. As per what I have already explained, the owners and charterers had entered into a contract and expressly agreed to this reefer monitoring system. Thus, this meant that the obligation of my client was to monitor the event logs and not the temperature list. Moreover, in the first place, the only purpose of adopting this software was to avoid going through these temperature records of around 10,000 containers on board and just rely on the event log. Having said this, without any further delay, I would like to respond to the first malfunction. So what has happened herein is that on 4th of July, around 1900 hours during the later part of the day, there was a power trip in the reefer container unit, which led to the supply temperature to increase. I request the tribunal to kindly refer to page 106 for this purpose, to the temperature list for this malfunction. Page number 106 in the case study.
Yes.
If the tribunal is with me. So on 4th of July, around 1900 hours, we can see that the temperature starts, the supply temperature, which is the middle row, starts increasing 14.75, and then subsequently on 5th of July, it continues increasing till 5th of July till 1700 hours, and then finally it comes back to the normal. I also request the tribunal to notice the true false column here. During this period, when there is a power trip in the container, the container is not able to receive power from the vessel's power supply as a result of the power trip, and the temperature logs show false here. Now, as we have just seen that the malfunction, the increase in temperature occurred during the later part of 4th of July. The morning round.
The council, it's not false at all times, no? It increases initially from 13.6 to 14.75. These are true. False happen subsequently.
Mr. Arbitrator, this is the reefer.
That happens after at 9 o'clock at night. But before that, the temperature has already increased.
Right, Mr. Arbitrator, there are some amount of fluctuations in the reefer container, as we are concerned with monitoring this reefer container, and there are some fluctuations. However, if the tribunal can note that when there is a false in this true false column,
yes,
then the temperature rises to 17.50. Otherwise, it is just 1 degree above the 13.75, which is an acceptable range. It is common for the reefer to go above plus minus 2. The range of the fluctuation of the reefer is plus minus 2.
Are you sure of that? I'm sorry. Are you sure of that fluctuation, or is just a statement that you're making?
Yes, Mr. Arbitrator.
Okay. You will take us to something which supports this point. Yes.
Given your obligations in the bill of lading.
Mr. Arbitrator, the bill of lading is the set temperature as per the bill of lading is 13.60.
Yes.
The supply temperature is meant to be 13.75.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, the supply temperature has a range of plus minus 2. The fluctuations are normal.
I understand fluctuations are normal, but when you're saying there is 1 degree fluctuation, it's quite an extensive. But anyway, we will get to that point. Don't worry about that. We can get to that, address that later.
Yes, you proceed with your argument.
Sure. So, Mr. Arbitrator, as we have just seen that there was a power trip, and as a result of that, there was a subsequent increase in temperature because your container was not able to receive power supply from my vessel. I request the tribunal to look at the Maldrich report for this malfunction now. I'm referring to page 126 of the case study. If the tribunal is with me.
Sure. Yes, please.
So I'm reading out at E1 column, action taken to solve the malfunction. During morning rounds, unit found trip, troubleshooting everything is found normal. So this is evidence here that there was a power trip, and as a result of that, your container was not able to receive power that our vessel was supplying to it. There's nothing on record to show that all the containers were not able to receive power, and it is normal in a power trip that the container will not be able to receive power. This shows no lapse of power supply on our end.
What happens to your endeavors to ensure that that things go fine, as mentioned in clause 17b?
Mr. Arbitrator, I request you to kindly look at the Maldrich report again.
Yes.
This is on page number 126. We can see that during morning rounds, unit was found trip. Now, the man working hours for this are 1 hour. So our team, our crew spent 1 hour on this, and subsequently the temperature comes back into the expected temperature trajectory. So we have undertaken repair.
Where do we get that? Where are the repairs? What are the parts consumed? Half of the things are blank, counsel.
No, Mr. Arbitrator, these things are very well filled. If we see the malfunction report, it specifies the action taken. It says during morning rounds, unit found trip. So they correct the trip. It is a normal trip which occurs in a technical product. And then finally, when it is, they check everything and they spend 1 hour total on this. and then finally it is rectified. And if you see the temperature log again, the temperature comes back into the normal.
Okay, you're talking about the man hours, which is in the conclusion. That's what I think my co-arbitrator was questioning. So I think that's where you're saying 2 into 0.5.
That's right, Mr. Arbitrator.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Should I
So
move ahead?
Yes, please. Sorry, just the
Yeah.
question I think which I'm trying to grapple with is this. You are basically telling me that you have no obligation at all to take care of the container at all. I mean, that's the impression I'm getting.
No, Mr.
Uh,
Arbitrator, I understand your concern.
right.
I will re-summarize my point on this, that on 4th of July, during the later part of the day, your reefer starts, the reefer encounters a power trip.
I understand.
Now, the daily rounds for this day are already over by then. However, as soon as we note this power trip during the morning rounds of the other day, which is the next day, we immediately undertake repairs and it is rectified and the temperature comes back to the normal.
Now, may I just interrupt you there again? I think we are giving too much stress to the monitoring. And I don't think the claimant's case is that, they do touch upon the monitoring aspect because it's one of the issues raised in the arbitration. But
Right.
their case is more on 17A2. And their entire case, they are trying to summarize is telling you that you did not take care of the cargo. So I'm not worried, I'm not concerned. Say that, okay, even if you monitored, you didn't monitor, the cargo would have still probably been damaged because of the trip. So the question you need to answer is address 17A2 and 17B, because I think there's also common ground that the Hague-Wisby rules or the Hague rules put in a similar obligation. So let's narrow down the issue to 17A and 17B, please.
Sure, Mr. Arbitrator. So if we see 17A2, it specifies failure on their part, the responsibilities and liabilities of the container, the owner, shall be failure on their part properly and carefully to carry, keep and care for the goods and containers while on board. While this is a general clause with respect to all the goods which may be carried on the vessel, 17B is a more specific clause which applies in our case, which is the header for this clause is for refrigerated goods. So if we read, yes.
Now continue.
Yes. So if we read from line 688, we can see the owner shall, weather permitting, monitor and record the performances once daily of all such units while on board in accordance with the charterer's instructions. So what instructions we received from the charterers was that you monitor our units once daily.
So are you saying there's no duty of care for refrigerated goods?
Mr. Arbitrator,
17A2. I'm asking the question. I'm just trying to understand this.
Right, Mr. Arbitrator, 17A2 mentions that you have to properly and carefully care for cargo.
Right.
Now, what this properly and carefully means has been interpreted in various cases,
Of course.
including GH Renton versus Palmera Trading. So what that case says is you have to properly and carefully care for cargo in accordance with the sound system. Now, the sound system we have in place in this case is the reefer monitoring system. Our reefer monitoring system works on the basis of the temperature list. We go to the master computer of the vessel once every day. We check it on ports. There is no temperature fluctuation as we check it on during the morning rounds. Further, during the next day, when we note that there is a temperature fluctuation in the reefer on 5th of July, we immediately take repairs.
Just one question, follow-up question from there.
Yeah.
Do you not agree that 17A2 has to be read with 17B? And when you read them, I mean, in the letter and spirit, it's not as if that your obligation is to check the performance once daily. It says minimum once. So that word minimum indicates that it is basis the requirement. So if there is a requirement, nothing stops you from going a second time or a third time. It's not as if that, once you have done and you wash your hands and you say, okay, now I have done my obligations, you throw your hands in the air and say, okay, now I can't be held liable. So when you read 17A2, to me, it has to be read with 17B, which when you read the minimum requirement and when you read the word minimum, it has to be understood in the perspective to indicate that if there arises a situation or if there is a need, then or a requirement for you to do that more than once to ensure that the container, a proper care of the consignment is taken, and rather it says that it has to be done carefully and to keep and carry the goods in the container. So if that's my understanding of it, what do you have to say?
Mr. Arbitrator, I understand your concern. I will be answering your questions in multiple layers. So there was an obligation. The obligations of the parties were decided as per the charter party. There were enough negotiations before execution of this charter party, which can be highlighted by the terms which have been struck down and added. So if we see, I request the tribunal to read the same clause, which is 17B from line 688. It says the owner shall, weather permitting, monitor and record the performance minimum once daily while on board in accordance with the charterer's instructions. So there have been also, if we read it with this clause has to be read with clause 5B8, which says monitor and record units once daily.
Mm-hmm.
And this says you have to monitor and record it minimum once daily as per the charterer's instructions. So even if it has to be monitored more than once daily, we should get some instructions before the voyage, during the voyage. Sometime we should get the instructions from the respondent.
Why do instructions have to be given continuously? I think that's what you are referring under 5 is a general obligation in any time charter party.
Right.
It's not something specific. Something specific is what you'll find in clause 17. And once there is something specific agreed, you can't fall back on something general. That's the law of interpretation that I understand.
Right. Mr. Arbitrator, however, even if we rely on this specific obligation, we can see that it is in accordance with the charterer's instructions. So even if it has to be done more than minimum once daily, it has to be instructed by the charterer. Further, I would also put on record.
How would the charterer know? He's not on board the vessel.
I'm coming to that, Mr. Arbitrator. The claimant has not even contended that we should have done it more than once daily. If you see their email, I request you to please.
No, their allegation is that there is a failure to constantly monitor. Now, I see there are two extreme ends. One is constant monitoring, and the other is only monitoring once. We are trying to try and fall somewhere in the golden, take the golden medium. So therefore, I'm asking you. It may not be, okay, as the claimants contain constant monitoring, but it also equally can't be that it is only going to be once, and then there is a complete bullivism of your obligations to say that, okay, now I'm done.
Mr. Arbitrator, the practice which was agreed by the parties in this case was to follow the reefer monitoring system. We had agreed before the execution of this charter party that these units have to be monitored once daily. If there is an instruction by it is not reasonable for a person to sit in there is a shortage of the crew as well. So it is not important. It is not reasonable for a person to sit there for 24 hours looking at all the containers in the reefer monitoring system. So the practice which was agreed by the parties, I'm referring to the agreement of the parties in this respect, was to monitor it once daily.
All right. So you expect the charterer who's not on board the vessel to give you instructions, but you say that it is not reasonable for you to monitor it more than once.
Mr. Arbitrator, we are not saying that. We are saying that the charterer should have told us that you have to monitor my units more than once daily if there is a need.
No, it's minimum. There is an implied reading.
It is also suffixed by according to the charterer's instructions. So the instructions can also be given before the starting of the voyage.
One final question from my end, and then you may proceed or whatever, subject to my other cooperators having any questions. Do you agree that under Article 3.2 of the Hague Rules, the liability of the ship owner is absolute, and therefore you are nevertheless, there has to be, I mean, if there is a damage to the consignment on board during a voyage from a port of loading to a port of destination, your liability as the owner is absolute?
Mr. Arbitrator, first of all, under the Article 3.2 of the Hague-Visby is qualified. There are exceptions to Article 3.2 which are contained in Article 4.
All right.
However,
and which exception do you fall under?
Hague-Visby rules do not apply to our case. I'm coming to that point. Hague rules do not apply to our case. I would want to submit that. Should I continue my answer?
Yes, please. Yes.
So, as per the Hague rules, for incorporation of Hague rules in the charter party, there has to be a clause paramount. However, if we see the charter party in this case, there is no clause paramount. Further, the clause which is being referred to by the claimant, which specifies that 14A, that 14A specifies that there is a clause paramount, that is not to be regarded as a clause paramount because clause paramount is drafted differently than this.
No, I think they have moved away from the case. The point is very simple, and I think we don't have enough time. So we're going to ask this question straight up.
Yes.
You say the Hague rules don't apply. I think it's common ground because their primary case is not on the Hague rules. Okay.
Right.
So the primary case is breach of 17A2. This is where we had discussed this before as well. So none of the exceptions apply. So the answer is the obligation under 17A2 is absolute. And I don't think there can be any dispute about that. Yes.
Mr. Arbitrator,
yes.
we have provided under 17A that there has to be, you have to properly and carefully care for the cargo, which is in accordance with the sound system. Now 17A ends there. Further, it is qualified by 17B, which specifies my specific responsibilities with respect to the refrigerated goods.
Understood. Okay. I think I've got your point. Okay. Just the last point. So you're saying, just if I read 17B, it says, except as provided above, the owner shall not be liable for malfunctioning of the integral refrigerated containers and the power packs put on board by the charterers. Right. So this is an exception to the exception in itself.
We fall in this except as provided. That is what I am arguing, that we have undertaken our duties under 17B. Thus, we fall within the except as provided above, and thus we hold no liability for the malfunction of the reefers of the charterers.
Okay.
If I may request an extension for 2 minutes, I will quickly summarize the second and third malfunction.
I think I'll leave it to the other arbitrators. I think.
I don't think you need to. I think we can move on to the next issue, whether you're handling it or your speaker's handling it.
Madam Arbitrator, if I can get just 1 minute to summarize it, I will quickly summarize.
I think we understood your case, so we don't.
Yeah, you don't have to labor on this.
Yeah, don't
we
worry
might hold against you if you continue this.
Yeah.
No,
actually, we were going to argue the exceptions provided under 17B at the last of the issue. So that's why I was concerned. It's fine. My other.
We're happy with the 17B answer. We leave it to them to respond to that. Of course, we're not saying you're correct. Of course, and we leave it to for the rebuttals, please.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Good afternoon again, members of the tribunal. So without any further delay, I'd like to draw the tribunal's attention to what the claimants have argued under the second issue. So under this issue, the claimants have argued that there is an expectation from the vessel's crew to advise charterers if the reefer was malfunctioning. Now I'll refute this claim of the charterers by making very quick two submissions. Firstly, there is no express obligation, express or implied for that matter, in the charter party, which gives rise to any expectation from the vessel's crew to advise or consult charterers in case of every reefer malfunction. Secondly, that even in absence of any express provision in this regard, in good faith, my client has adopted a system of notifying charterers about every reefer malfunction and subsequent repairs undertaken. And therefore, in any case, my client cannot be held liable for breach of any obligation. Now, coming to my first submission, I'd like to draw the tribunal's attention to clause 17B, line 690. And I'm reading line 690 for the benefit of the tribunal. It says that the endeavor to repair the owner's crew shall endeavor to repair and rectify any breakdown, fault or deficiency which may occur in respect of such units using the resources on board the vessel. Now this part is important. We'll endeavor to repair and rectify using the resources on board the vessel. I'm continuing from line 695. Line 695 says, if such resources are insufficient, the owner shall immediately notify the charter so they may take action to obtain any required spares or specialized repair facilities. Now, the only obligation of consultation, the very limited obligation of consultation is in line 695, and that arises in case when the resources on board are insufficient. Now, I'll demonstrate to the tribunal how in all of these three malfunctions, though the charter's container was malfunctioning, however, the repairs that were undertaken for the same were done with the resources on board the vessel, and therefore the consultation with the charters in any case could not have helped us anymore. If I may refer the tribunal to page 126. Page 126 is the Malreef report for the first malfunction. Now, the first malfunction is a normal is a power trip. Now, a power trip requires basic spare tools to check and bring back the unit back to its normal functioning. which could have been easily done with the resources on board. And there are sufficient resources that have been provided by the charters already. That's given in another 17 clause B. And therefore it was repaired, the temperature came back to normal and no consultation required with the charters. Now the second and third malfunctions are instances of gas leak. Now in this regard, if I may draw the tribunal's attention back to 17B on page 19. I'm sorry for cross-referring too many times.
That's
but
all
this
right.
is certainly important.
Yeah.
I am referring to 697. It says that the owners confirm that the vessels who are experienced in repair of reefer containers have the necessary standard tools, including environmentally friendly refrigerant recovery equipment. So my client had made sure that in case there is a gas leak during the voyage, I at least have the required spare parts on board to undertake those repairs very quickly, and which was done both at the time of second and the third malfunction, and therefore no case for consultation arose in this case. Now coming to my so therefore under this submission I've briefly summarized that A, there was no ex obligation to consult in case of every reefer malfunction. The obligation was limited. That limited obligation did not arose in our present case. Now the claimants have also argued that there is an implied term, and they have vehemently argued that there's an implied term in good faith to consult charterers and all of that argument. But such implication cannot take place in this case, because the primary rule for an implication of a term is that it must not be against the express intention of the parties. Now I referred the tribunal to clause 17B, wherein we had seen that the obligation of consultation was very limited, and it becomes clear that the express intention of the parties was to limit the consultation only to those cases when the resources on board are insufficient to undertake repairs, and therefore an implication of term which widens such consultation duty in cases of every reefer malfunction cannot take place, because this would go against the express intention of the parties. Very quickly, I'll also wrap up to my last submission under this issue, that even in the absence of any express provision, my client had under good faith, that's what the charters expect, my client had under good faith taken due care of keeping the charterers informed of their malfunctioning container by sending out timely reefer malfunction reports. In this regard, if I may refer the tribunal back to 126, the tribunal may note that the malfunction report is a fairly elaborate malfunction report, and it contains all the data charter may want to know about his reefer container. For example, E1 shows when was the malfunction noted, when was the repairs undertaken, what were the spare parts used for it, and moreover, it also shows other technical data which the charter may want to know about it. And all of these reefer malfunction reports were duly sent in time as soon as the repairs were undertaken. Now the claimants have also argued that there is delay in sending out reefer malfunction reports, but I must bring in attention to the tribunal that my co-counsel had addressed that there is a process. The process is that there's a temperature list produced. There's an basis on that temperature list, an event log is produced. Based on that event log, my client's crew sits and checks that event log. As soon as, and I emphasize, as soon as my crew in the rounds look at these event logs and notices an alarm activity, we undertake repairs, which have been clearly shown in all the three malfunctions. And as soon as we undertake repairs, we send these malreef reports to the charterers. Therefore, the tribunal will note that there's a due process, and that due process is undertaken even in absence of an express provision in this regard, in good faith by the owners. And in any case, the owners cannot be held liable for duly consulting the charterers of any reefer malfunction. We have fulfilled our duty. We have fulfilled our duty in good faith. Furthermore, I'd also like to, since I have some time left,
what about constant electricity failure?
Indeed. Honorable member of the tribunal, if the member of the tribunal if I may direct the tribunal's attention to page 107, back to 107. The claimants argue that there was a power failure, and we as on behalf of my client, I accept that we have an obligation to supply power. Now, in a power mechanism, there are two ends. One is the duty to supply power, and other is to see whether the container is receiving power or not. Now, all other containers on board were receiving power. My obligation is limited to check whether the vessel can supply power. My obligation does not go to the fact to check whether the container is receiving the power. It is a malfunction in the integral unit of the container because of which a power trip happened and the container was not receiving the power. And I highlight the container was not receiving the power. My obligation is limit supplying power. I have fulfilled my obligation. I have supplied power. There is no lapse on supplying of power. There's a lapse on the container receiving the power. Even after this, under my obligation, I monitored it, inspected the container, undertook repairs, and after I undertook repairs, the container started monitoring.
Therefore, the obligation to inform. Therefore, the obligation to inform the charterers, because there was because all other containers were receiving electricity except this one, which was not. So therefore, they argued that you are entitled to inform them.
No, Honorable, with due respect, I beg to disagree on that point. So there is an obligation. Now that obligation is a due process. There's a due care obligation. That's a general provision, which means we need to adopt a sound system. Now that sound system, we have agreed with the express intention of the parties. That sound system is under 17B. Now that sound system says that you monitor and record the performance in case you see there is any problem. Now that could be problem with the refrigeration unit, there could be a the power trip, there could be gas leak. As soon as you notice there's a problem, you undertake repairs. You at least send your labor. You at least send your labor to undertake repairs, which was duly done in this case. And in light of this whole express intention of the party, in light of this whole system, the charterers were nowhere involved in this whole system. Because you see, the charterers and we had expressed the system. In that system also, the charterers had already given us all the spare parts, all the units, everything we needed to repair the malfunction and rectify the malfunction. We saw it, we undertook repairs, and there was nothing which the charterers could have done in this case, even if we would have consulted them. Because the limited duty is to only consult them in cases when the resources on board are not sufficient. So what I want to primarily highlight is that the charters have made us independent. Thanks to charterers that they have already given us everything to repair. We are providing our crew for that. And therefore, there in this whole process, there is nothing that the charters could have done, even if they consulted.
My question is, then, is it your case that, like you said, the charterers have given you independence to handle the situation in a way you see fit, but at no point of time do they expect a duty on your part to keep them apprised of developments, even though under, where is it, which clause is it? Even though you are aware that you are transporting goods, the charterers have made it very clear that you are, where's that clause? Just give me a second. Clause 13 gives you essentially what are the charterers' instructions, and you have maintained the position that unless the charterers give me instructions, I have no obligation to go and report. I don't have to make any sort of draw their attention to these malfunctioning reports. Would it not be for a crew that is trained specifically to deal with reefer containers the way your crew is as per clause 17B, is it not a reasonable expectation that you would say to the charterers, report the first malfunction as soon as the malfunction is detected to the charterers, irrespective of whether you have carried out repairs or not? Is it your case that that is not an expectation that charterers can have from you?
I'll answer that, Honorable Ma'am. Madam Arbitrator, I'll answer that in two layers. Now, firstly is that that's true that we are going to work with the charterer's instructions. But it is also the case that there is a sound system in place. Now, what does the charterer want to know about the reefer container? The charterer is concerned that if there is any malfunction, which may happen for any reason, that you detect that malfunction and you undertake repairs. Now that in that whole system, what the charterers has done is that they've given us the responsibility, you monitor and record the performance. You undertake repairs. For undertaking repairs, we are giving you whatever you'll require in normal circumstances. But still in case you feel that there is something which is not available on board, you notify us, you consult. So the intention of the charterers is to provide with the owners everything and make us liable for the same. I'm not saying that not make us liable for the same. But that's what I argued in my submission. They nowhere in this whole system say that you inform us of every malfunction. You see, Madam Arbitrator, for informing also, we need to adopt another system, which requires another investment, which has to be done expressly by the party.
Counsel, I may just interrupt you.
We are traveling high.
Sorry, Counsel, I may just interrupt you. I think there's no system required. I think there is something like a noon report which is sent every day. Okay, so let's not get into the technical things of that being onerous on the owners to provide an update back to the charter. So please, that's not an argument which has really any technical or tenable grounds at all. So anyway,
An obligation under the charter party.
yeah, I mean, anyway, this is how the commercial thing works. So I understand we can leave it to that. So if we can put your case in a nutshell is this, and please correct me if I'm wrong. And I want to put this because I think we've extensively discussed a lot. So you admit that the cargo is damaged. You admit that the cargo was damaged. And when I say you, the parties, I'm addressing both parties on this, taking your time, but addressing both parties on this. So the admitted position is the cargo is damaged. The admitted position is the cargo is damaged because the temperature was not maintained properly on the ship. Is that correct?
Yeah, we agree till that. We agree till that, but
There's
the
a
caveat that
difference.
there were pre-shipment issues also.
Yes. So third, the two reasons is one, the surveyor says that it is because of the temperature issue, and there is a possibility of the pre-shipment condition of the cargo being a problem. Correct? And then this is where the difference lies between the parties, where owners feel they don't have a duty of care under 17A and 17B. And charterers feel that there is a duty of care under 17A. Is that correct?
The owners feel that there is a duty of care, but that
Right.
duty of care is limited to 17B, which has been expressly intended by the parties. You see, honorable member, what has happened here is that the charters are very confident about the container, that it only requires monitoring once daily. They agreed to it. We agreed to it. But now it is that container that has malfunctioned so many times that there are automatically gaps between two monitoring sessions that have come. And it is due to this reason, plus pre-shipment issues, that the container has gone bad.
If charterers were confident, they would have probably told you, don't check the container throughout the voyage. So it's not the question of confidence which they have. This is how its practice is done. So
that's what has happened in
the
this
point.
case, honorable member.
The only question we're really defining it difficult is because we're getting the impression that, oh, you put the container on board as a charterer. It's by crew is your servants. They are not doing the job properly. So sorry, it's bad luck. They're your servants. Oh, the container has other issues. It's your problem. We don't have any responsibility. This is what I'm trying to find out. What extent is your responsibility? Is it just to endeavor to carry out repairs?
Honorable member, I'll just take a line to answer that. I'm referring to line 698. I'm still sticking to 17B, your honorable member, because 17A2 is a general duty of care which applies to all types of cargo. The fact that we have accepted a system for refrigerated goods, only this clause will apply. Because you see, in absence of any refrigerated cargo, for example, we are carrying dry cargo, then all obligations that will emanate from 17A2. So it is only to fulfill that void that we have 17A1 and 17A2. But in light, we are carrying refrigerated goods, we will follow 17B because there is an extra sound system that has been agreed by the parties. I am referring to line 698.
That's fine. I've already referred that to your counsel.
Yes.
So that's basically
and these fall squarely in except as provided above. Our responsibilities we have fulfilled whatever was agreed.
So are you now saying that now your case is now that 17A is a fall apart, 17B being a specific clause exclusively dealing with refrigerated goods, it should be overriding everything?
Indeed.
Right. Okay. And then 17C and 17D all of a sudden become common for everything else. I mean, 17C, D, E, F, G, H. Is that common to A and B, or it's only exclusive to B now? I mean, I'm just looking at the layout of the clause.
But at least in our case, the 17C and 17D will also be applied because there is a refrigerated goods that are being carried.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay, I think I'm satisfied with whatever you've said so far. I've answered. I'll let my co-arbitrators ask any questions if they have any further questions.
No, I don't think I have any other questions. I think you've answered. I mean, I think you've addressed all your issues as well.
Okay, so we'll go back to the rebuttal then. I think to the respondents, or to the claimants rather. Sorry.
Yes. I just saved the timer. Members of the tribunal, the claimant is firstly appalled by the opposing counsel's statements that 2-degree temperature up and down is normal practice. My client does not believe that for temperature sensitive cargo like bananas, 2 degrees can be varying is acceptable. though it was the clear intention of the parties by entering into the contract that the set temperature, 13.6 degrees, will be maintained throughout the duration of the charter party. And the respondents would address any fluctuation from this. 2 degrees is a whole world away and will certainly lead to cargo damage in the case of bananas. Further, Mr. members of the tribunal, my opposing counsels have submitted, and I would like to quote opposing counsels 1's response to opposing counsel 2, that power trips happen. It's normal. It's clear here that their obligation was to repair the power trip as soon as possible. Further, members of the tribunal, my opposing counsels have always tried to refer to 4th and 5th July in order to demonstrate they fulfilled their obligations under 17B. I would direct you to the temperature logs on page 111 on 11th to 13th of July. Members of the tribunal, it is clear that temperature started rising in the early hours of 11th July. On 11th July, on 12th July, the temperature continued rising. And only on 13th July was action taken to correct the temperature rise. Hence, my opposing counsels claim that they fulfilled their obligation under 17B to monitor minimum once daily cannot be upheld, since it's clear that on 11th and 12th July, it did not happen.
So you're saying the damage to the cargo probably happened between this time of 11th to the 13th?
Mr. Abhijit, I didn't get your question. Could you repeat it?
No, it's not a question actually. So is this more like a statement? Is it the position that the cargo damage probably happened between the 11th to the 13th of July when there was malfunction happened and it was not checked? Is that correct?
The survey report clearly mentions it happened because of temperature fluctuations. The longest period of temperature fluctuations as per the logs is 11th to 13th July. Hence, it can be easily assumed that the cargo damage happened because of this failure.
Understood. Yeah. Thank you.
Further, I would like to emphasize again on 17A2 and coming back to the point of power supply. It is the obligation on the respondents to ensure that the container is properly and carefully equipped to take care of the restricted cargo. In this case, the respondents cannot claim 17A2 does not apply to them. Even if there was minimal tripping of power container and the unit, they had to correct it under 17A2.
Okay. Just one question on this, and I know time's run out. One very quick question. Why did you not try to limit your liability under the bill of lading? And what would be the consequences if you did actually limit your liability?
So clarification 6 says that we settled the amount on the basis of the invoices given to us by the...
That's besides the point. My question is, were you entitled to limit liability?
No, Mr. Arbitrator, we were entitled to pay the merchant in full.
Okay. Does your co-counsel have anything to say on that as well?
No, Mr. Arbitrator, nothing as such. As far as the knowledge of counsel is concerned, this is whatever the counsel 2 said.
So I just have this question, okay, and I'll address this. What about 17 clause 17 C1? Okay, so anyway, that's the point I think I need to address, but I'll leave it for the the respondents to address their point, because that should be the answer they should give us now.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Arbitrator.
Yep.
Yes, honorable members of the tribunal, I'll just make quick rebuttals to what they have said. So I'll just take up the point of why I don't understand why they are pressing a point of power non-supply on 11th, 12th, and 13th, where the temperature logs are clearly showing that there was a power supply. It says true clearly. So there is no point of saying that there was no power supply. Moreover, they are still not understanding how a REFMA monitoring system works, yet they have expressly agreed to it in the charter party, but now they are going back on it. Now they are not showing to the tribunal that the alarm activity starts only on 12th July, if I may refer to page 120. And as we have already explained to the tribunal that we are only liable to look at the alarm activity, and the alarm activity starts only on 12th July at 2 o'clock. And by that time, the morning rounds for the same were already over. our crew automatically got to know about it on 13th. The 13th, a malreef was generated, repairs were undertaken, and the same was corrected on board in consonance with what our liability is. Also, they are still sticking to 17A2, in which our
just besides the point, sorry, just leave that point away. Keep that aside because we dealt with that extensively. So you're saying that the alarm system, how does the alarm system work? Like, do you get it on the ship? Do you know that? I mean, it's a technical question, but if you can answer that, it's great.
Yes, so my co-counsel had also explained this. So the system is that the reefer monitoring system is a software, which is, it's a Dayang reefer monitoring system in this case. And the Dayang reefer monitoring system is a software which receives all of these temperature lists and then produces an alarm list, which is essentially the event log. So there is no ringing of alarm as such, but the alarm activity is displayed contractually or textually. So this has been employed only.
Therefore, you're telling me that this entire software, which your co-counsel also explained, is only looked at once in a day. Is that correct?
Indeed, because the monitoring obligation is of months daily.
Okay, that's anyway. Yeah, minimum is 1 point, which is right. Mr. Kamath pointed that out as well. But are you saying that no one is, so you basically can go through 24 hours of no one picking up the alarm, which is a bit absurd, but I take your point. We'll move ahead. Just please address us now on the limitation issue, please. What if we were to find you liable, would you be liable for the full amount?
I'll just take a second.
No, please, we can give you a minute, yes. Me, you and your co-counsel, please. I'm happy for anyone to answer this point. Certainly your PNI club would have been interested to find out if there is a limitation of liability.
So I actually have no idea about how the 17 clause C works.
Okay. Does your co-counsel have anything to add to that? We are just trying to understand. I mean, this is a position. There is a liability. Yes. Okay. May or may not be. But wouldn't your position be, I mean, as a claim respondent, saying, if you had to reasonably settle, why did you not try to limit your liability to the figure as stated in 17C1? And in fact, this also finds its place in the bill of lading contract. So they could have reduced the liability, if at all. I don't know the answer to that. That's a calculation I would have expected the two parties to have. But that, anyway, is that something to be looked at anyway?
We'll just take care of it.
Next round. Whoever gets there, keep that in mind.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much. I think I have no further questions.
It was pleasure pleading before the Honorable Tribunal, both for the co-counsels.
Thank you.
Pleasure, Zaz.
Yeah. Okay. There's no further questions on our side. Ramya, Pratimesh?
No, nothing.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Are we already in that other room?
No.
Yeah, I think there are only 3 of us here.
We were very impressed with the technical knowledge. It's great that you went and researched on how container reefers work, how PNI clubs work, and how they would love to do things. And I can tell you the PNI clubs would be very happy to settle issues always. They're just happy to settle cargo claims always. So great job. And best of luck, whoever goes through. But so I'll just take you to that. Concentrate on the finer issues which really make or break your case rather than just trying to address everything sometimes. That's the only thing I have to say. I'll leave it to the others to say further.
Yeah, nothing more to add. The hard work is really showing. I was very impressed with how well you picked up on the points of law that we raised. And yeah, your responses were really good. And like Siddharth mentioned, it was pretty close. And both teams were really good. So congratulations to both the teams. And I think personally, shouldn't be like one of you lost. We just had to pick one team to go with that did better.
Yeah, so for me, speaking for myself, I really enjoyed this. it was absolutely very difficult for us to select one amongst the two. Both teams worked exceedingly hard, and that is reflected by the way they answered the questions. Since I've asked to give input, there is one thing that I will definitely mention. Please, this is especially arbitration, and in arbitration, more so, parties are expected when we refer to each other or the opposing teams. There's one thing that which is an absolute must, which is that one can't be rude, or in that sense at least be ridiculing the arguments on the other of each other. So that is something that we must bear in mind. We cannot, I mean, in arbitration it is semi-formal, but it has to be extremely cordial. And I mean, aggression has to be in form of your arguments, and not really in by kind of making remarks. So that's something that I feel can be avoided. Again, something that I said in the earlier rounds, and I'll repeat here again: when a question is posed to you, it is preferred, rather, I mean, judges would prefer the question being answered immediately rather than waiting and then arguing later. It gives the judges an impression that you are skirting the issue. You're not in the sense able to answer a question. So if you, I mean, it's fair. It's not humanly possible for everybody to know everything, and therefore, if you are asked a question, you can say that. I mean, if you are not aware and you if you're not comfortable in answering, there's no point. As someone I think in the round said that, okay, I'm not aware. There's nothing wrong. Y'all are not lawyers as yet, but very happy to see how lawyers in the making have at least prepared themselves. So that's it from me.
Yeah.
All the best for the future rounds.
Yeah, just sorry, one point I need to, and I forgot this. And the only disappointment was both of you all did not look at the SDR issue. You need to always think of a case. We all want to win cases, but you always need to think, if we lose, what best, right? How best can I protect my client's interest? Okay, I'm not saying it's a disappointment in the sense, oh, it was right in front of you all. 17A, B, C is right in front of you all. And this is very important to address. So even if I lose, how can I reduce my exposure to a figure? If at all, that's an option. Okay, so maybe this is something you guys have some time to really work on in the next few hours. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
If the arbitrators permit and the participants want to ask any particular questions. Okay, if there are none, then we'll just pose for a quick screenshot, the ceremonial screenshot that we have.
You'll hear a shutter, so I'll just take a screenshot.
All right.
All right, great.
Thank you.
I request the participants to please leave the meeting, because now we'll be announcing the results in this.
Thank you. Thank you
With
so
the
much.
judges to please
Thank you.
Okay. Have you guys calculated it? Do you know? Do you have the answer?
Yeah, we do.
So.
The rest of the people are joining us. We'll just take a minute.
Oh, so sad to see other people's faces, man. I hate this. At least in courtrooms, you know the result because the peon comes and asks you for money before.
I don't miss that at all.
But there have been times where we lost the case, so the peons have asked the money as well. क्या पैसा हार गया मैटर पैसा क्या लेगा? Ratimesh, what do you think is going to happen with Mr. Bhushan's case, man?
Yeah, unfortunately, he's now being. I don't know what they'll do here. This chap is unpredictable. It's being recorded. Okay.
Oh,
No,
very
no,
good.
we've